Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. Today is day 95 of Israel's war on Gaza. And as promised, every single day, we're going to give you the latest updates about what's going on in the region. As of right now, at least 23,084 Palestinians have been killed and 58,926 others have been injured in the ongoing Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip since October 7th. Those stats are, of course, courtesy of the Palestinian Ministry of Health as late as Monday evening. Now, some people will say that those numbers are conservative, that the number is closer to 30,000. That could be true, but I'm always going to give the most conservative estimates possible as we talk about and think about the overall carnage, the overall devastation and destruction of Israelis' violent bombardment of the Gaza Strip. So we're going to keep talking about that. In addition to that, Israel says that 4 soldiers were killed in Gaza on Monday. That brings Israel's total war losses in the Gaza Strip to 182. 182. Again, 23,084 Palestinians killed, over 50,000 injured, and Israel's war losses are 182. This is not a war against Hamas. Even the language of war obscures the fact that there's a gross imbalance of power, resources, and technology. This is something else. This is a genocide. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh said on Monday that Israel will continue and has continued to withhold the Palestinian Authority's tax funds despite intervention from the United States. This is another important point. As much as the Israeli government will argue that Palestine is its own entity, that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is its own institution and construct, and that Palestinians only have Fatah and Hamas and the PA overall and the Palestinian National Council and the PLO, et cetera, to blame, that ignores the fact that Israel controls every bit of the on-the-ground political, economic, and social reality of Palestinian people. By the way, hit the like button if y'all out there and y'all understand what I'm talking about. I didn't get a chance to do my intro today, but hit the like button. Hit the like button if you agree with what I'm saying. Also, continue to write in where you're coming from. We'll shout some of you out before the end of this update. But this is an important point. Tax revenue that the Palestinian Authority is supposed to get, Israel controls everything from postal service to tax revenue, everything, population registry, all of it controlled by Israel. And we've talked about that to some extent in the Gaza Strip in terms of Israel having effective control over Palestine, excuse me. But it's very much true in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. There is nothing that Palestinians do that Israel does not over determine and oversee. All right. That's an important point to recognize. Sigrid Kaag, the United Nations Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, announced that she'll be based in Jordan. Now, that's an interesting thing, right? This woman was appointed to a post that was created last month in December. And the idea was to have a person representing the United Nations who would oversee the rebuilding of Gaza, the reconstruction of Palestinian infrastructure. But guess what? Israel won't give the United Nations visas, just like they wouldn't give security assurances to inspectors and to UN staff and all these other folk, not to mention many journalists. So she's going to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza from another country. I mean, can you imagine me getting hired to oversee the rebuilding of Manhattan? And they put me in Delaware? Or God forbid, Jersey? Yuck. Just kidding, Jersey people. But you get my point. That's wild. That's absolutely wild. An Israeli airstrike killed a veteran Hezbollah commander, identified by Hezbollah as Wissam Tawil, in the Kherbat Salam village, southern Lebanon, on Monday, which is a really important moment in the current political climate. As members of Hezbollah are being allegedly killed, or I think it's been confirmed. Hezbollah has confirmed it, right? So there's no dispute about this. As people are getting killed in the region, and there is a growing outrage, not just from Iran, not just from Hezbollah, but throughout the region and really throughout the world at Israel's intervention in Gaza, its bombardment of Gaza, its genocide in Gaza. You're going to see more resistance. And Israel is committed, as they've said quite clearly, Netanyahu has said this, to making sure that Hezbollah is also wiped out. And that they're looking, I won't say they're looking forward to violence. They haven't said that. But it's very clear, as Muhammad Ali used to say, that they're itching for a quarrel. And so at the end of the day, when you see strikes like this, it makes many observers of the region believe, myself included, that we may see an escalated regional conflict. So it won't just be contained in the what is now just the southern part of the Gaza Strip. They've cleared out the north. But now, if this becomes a proxy war elsewhere, if this becomes an expanded struggle in southern Lebanon, if for some reason, although I don't think this would happen, this extends into Jordan, we could see a real crisis that then brings in major global powers and escalates all of this beyond our greatest fears. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in that southern part of Gaza, because that's something else that's really important to cover. Yesterday, Israel, its military forces, bombarded the eastern part of Khan Yunis, as well as the central Gaza Strip, with what they called people on the ground called ground clashes. So again, Khan Yunis is filled with on the ground violence, in addition to the sort of air raids and missile strikes that people are subjected to throughout the central and southern regions of Gaza. So what's very clear is that things aren't getting better. Things aren't getting more stable. Violence isn't even isolated to particular areas right now. No, this is getting worse, and it's going to continue to get worse until the international community steps in, and particularly Europe steps in. European nations like France have to step in. Germany should step in. The UK should step in. And of course, the United States, the biggest supporter of Israel, has to do something different. Speaking of the United States doing something different, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he arrived in Tel Aviv last night. He showed up in Tel Aviv to have a briefing with officials from the Israeli government. Obviously, he had spent the last 2 days talking with leaders from Qatar, from Jordan, trying to talk about how to end this quote unquote war. Now, there has been somewhat of an advance in the dialogue to the extent that Blinken is now saying that he will press Prime Minister Netanyahu, according to Al Jazeera, to quote, do more to protect civilians and to do more to make sure that humanitarian assistance is getting into the hands of those who need it. That is a far cry from a ceasefire, which is what the global community is calling for. That is far from even an extended humanitarian pause. He's simply saying, be more efficient and more accurate in the destruction of Gaza. Now, from a humanitarian perspective, that is an improvement. I don't want to pretend that that's nothing. And getting humanitarian aid in is not nothing. Again, the World Health Organization, WHO, tried to get in, but again, they couldn't get security clearance yesterday, or they haven't been able to get security clearance at all. So Blinken saying he's going to try to do more, or he's going to urge Netanyahu to do more, is not the wrong answer. It's just insufficient. It's wildly insufficient. And given the United States' commitment to providing the Israeli government with weapons, with money, and with political cover, there's no reason to believe that what Blinken is saying is anything other than empty rhetoric. I also want to point out, he spoke to MBS Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabian crown prince. What Blinken says is, and this is interesting, he said that Arab nations are still on board with normalizing relations with Israel. One of the legacies of the Trump administration, the Abraham Accords, the work of Trump, and of course, Jared Kushner, was to create policies which they framed as peace agreements. We're going to create peace in the Middle East. And these weren't peace agreements. These were weapons contracts. These were military pacts. These were not at all peace agreements, because most of the nations that Israel made the accords with were not people that they had beef with. We've created peace between Israel and Morocco. When was that Morocco and Israel had a military skirmish? I wasn't alive. Y'all weren't mostly alive. You're talking about 6, 7 decades ago. So it wasn't about that. It was about creating a set of economic relationships with Israel that would allow or that would encourage Arab nations to effectively do nothing as Israel continues to occupy the West Bank, expand settlements, and effectively control Gaza. In other words, uh, the idea was to encourage Arab nations to sell out. And let's see what happens. I'll just leave it there. But they did say that normalizing relations with Israel would require that the conflict end in Gaza, quote, and a practical pathway to a Palestinian state, quote unquote, is established. So these are important points. The Arab world is not going to, at this moment anyway, normalize relations with Israel while a genocide is taking place. But Israel is likely playing the long game. They're assuming that once this gets normalized, I mean, think about how opposed the Arab world was to Israel's formation in 1948. Think about how opposed the Arab world were, and really much of the global South, to Israel's actions after the 1967 war. But slowly and surely, as time moves on, nations begin to forget suffering. The misery becomes quotidian, it becomes ordinary. And when that happens, things change. So yeah, Mohammed bin Salman couldn't sell to the Saudi Arabian people. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi couldn't sell to the Egyptian people a normalized agreement with Israel right at this moment. But what happens in 6 months? What happens in a year? What happens in 5 years? These are the questions that we have to ask, but this is the scrutiny that we have to pay to this situation, because if we don't, then these deals will get made, the normalization will happen, and it will happen at the expense of the Palestinian people. I just talked about Egypt. Well, Egyptian sources have confirmed to Al Arabi Al Jadid, or maybe I should say Al Arabi Al Jadid if it's Egyptian, newspaper, that an Israeli security delegation has arrived in Cairo with the aim of, quote, resuming negotiations aimed at releasing Israeli prisoners held by resistance factions in Gaza. That is according, again, to Al Jazeera. That's an interesting development as well, right? It's an interesting thing that there might be a release of hostages, which I support. I support the release of all hostages. No one knows. It's one thing to take military personnel. It's one thing in a war to have prisoners of war and to capture combatants. But no innocent person, no civilian should never be captured. I encourage the release of all prisoners everywhere, of all hostages everywhere. Let's move on to one more thing, because we can't talk about the United States without also talking about the White House. Not just President Biden, who I'll talk about more even later, but also U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. She took a call yesterday with Israeli President Isaac Herzog. And on that call, she reiterated the steadfast support the United States has for Israel. So if any of y'all were thinking that maybe there'd be some slippage, that maybe some daylight would form between Israel and the United States, that maybe there was going to be a public push for a ceasefire, that maybe there'd be a public criticism of Israel's actions, nope, not going to happen. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and the rest of the administration publicly has argued very clearly and consistently for steadfast, according to Vice President Harris, support of Israel. All right, before we go, just a reminder that the violence that's taking place because of the war in Gaza, the war on Gaza, is not limited to Gaza. As I always say, the West Bank is also paying a heavy price, as it did before October 7th. Well, live ammunition fired by Israeli forces on Monday night injured a young Palestinian in the town of Qafin, which is north of Tulkarem. Tulkarem, the town, not the refugee camp, I'm assuming. That's according to Wafa. Israeli forces shot and killed 3 young Palestinian men. Yusuf Ali El-Kholi, 22 years old, Ahid Salman Musa, 23 years old, and Tariq Amjad Shaheen, 24 years old. These are babies. These are all 3 of these young men were killed in the town of Iktaba, which is to the east of Tulkarem City, on Monday. And then the 4th person was detained by forces. They shot him, they injured him, and they still locked him up. Sound familiar, y'all? An Israeli military vehicle ran over one of these men. They shot him, and then the military vehicle ran over the man. There's a video of this. You can check out the video on Al Jazeera's website. Hamda Sarhout, my colleague over at Al Jazeera, reported this. Y'all always say Palestinians are violent, and they always respond to violence with violence. Well, today, Tuesday, several factions, national factions, like national liberation factions, as well as Islamic factions, collectively declared a general strike. That is a full economic and labor stoppage. He did that in Tulkarm as a way of commemorating the lives and mourning the deaths of those 3 young Palestinian men. And again, for the record, there's a long history of Palestinian nonviolence, Palestinian resistance, and Palestinian general strikes going all the way back to the British mandate, at least. But I'm tired of reporting that people are getting killed and beaten and run over. This is disgusting. But in addition to the killings, there's also night raids. Again, the West Bank has been marked by night raids forever now, for decades, since 1967. It's no surprise that at night you see Israeli officials, Israeli forces, or in some areas, Palestinian forces, PA forces, and sometimes PA forces coordinate or collaborate with the Israeli state to perform these overnight raids in cities. And last night was no different. There were raids in Anabta, Kafr al-Labad, Qalqiya, Nablus, Hussan, Atara, and several towns and villages in Jenin. It's rough out there. And it's important, family, that we keep our eyes on these stories, that we keep our eyes on Palestine, because right now the media is trying to turn the page. The American media is going to start focusing on elections and Trump and all the circus that comes with him. The global media is going to make this seem like we're over the war, or it's just an ordinary kind of violence that just happens over there in the Middle East or in Latin America or in Africa. You know, those brown and black people, they just kill each other. So they will just, the global media will start to ignore this too. So it's important for us every single day to cover this information, to cover this story. And that's what we're going to do right here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. So make sure you check us out. Make sure you spread the word. Make sure you hit the like button if you feel what I'm talking about here. Hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell so you can get updates on everything we're talking about. And of course, if you're so inclined, hit the join button and become a part of the MLH family. And last but not least, my dear family, of course, if you want to make a direct contribution to the channel, please do. All you got to do is use our Cash App right there, MLHTV. And if you do that, you can support the expansion and the maintenance and the development of this platform. That's how we get political education. That's how we get critical education. That's how we get radical ideas. That's where we get alternative media, by investing in ourselves. So anyway, have a good day, and I'll see y'all later. Peace.